I pretended to be sleeping when my son emptied my bank account. Through half-closed eyes, I watched him sit at my computer at 2 o'clock in the morning, typing frantically, transferring every penny I had saved for 40 years. $127,000, gone in 15 minutes. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. He thought I was a foolish old woman who didn't understand technology. He thought I would wake up confused and helpless. He thought wrong. The next morning, I made one phone call that changed everything. That single call didn't just get my money back. It revealed a conspiracy that involved my own daughter-in-law, exposed fraud at 3 different banks, and taught my son a lesson he would never forget. What happened next shocked everyone, including me. Margaret Chen was 68 years old and had been a widow for 5 years. Her husband David had died suddenly from a heart attack, leaving her with a modest house in Portland, Oregon, and a comfortable savings account built over decades of careful living. She had worked as a library assistant for 35 years before retiring, and David had been an accountant. Together, they had saved every extra dollar, dreaming of traveling in their old age. But David never got to see Europe or Asia. He died 3 months before their planned trip to Japan. Margaret kept the house and the memories, living simply on her pension and Social Security. Her only child, Robert, was 39 years old and worked in sales. Or at least, that's what he told her. Robert had married Melissa 6 years ago, a woman Margaret never quite trusted. There was something calculating in Melissa's eyes, something cold behind her sweet smile. For the past 2 years, Robert had been visiting more often. At first, Margaret was happy. Her son was showing interest in her life again, asking about her health, her finances, her plans. He even offered to help her set up online banking so she wouldn't have to drive to the bank every week. Margaret thought it was thoughtful. Robert spent an afternoon showing her how to log in, how to check her balance, how to pay bills online. He was so patient, so caring. What Margaret didn't tell Robert was that she understood computers better than he thought. She had worked in a library for 35 years, helping patrons with digital catalogs, e-books, and online research. She knew how to clear browser history. She knew about password managers, and she knew that when Robert asked her to write down her passwords just in case of emergency, he was planning something. Margaret played along. She wrote down fake passwords on a piece of paper and left it in her desk drawer where Robert could find it. The real passwords were stored in her memory and in an encrypted file on a USB drive hidden in her sewing kit. She also set up text alerts for every transaction over $100, and she installed a small security camera in her living room, positioned to show her desk and computer. 3 weeks ago, Robert started visiting every few days. He asked questions about her will, about her insurance policies, about which bank accounts she used. Melissa came with him sometimes, sitting quietly in the corner, watching, listening. Margaret noticed how Melissa's eyes would light up when they discussed money. She noticed how Melissa would nudge Robert when Margaret mentioned her savings. One evening, Robert asked if he could borrow $5,000 for a business opportunity. Margaret said she needed to think about it. Robert's face darkened for just a moment before he smiled again. That's when Margaret knew something was very wrong. She started documenting everything. She took screenshots of her bank balances. She saved every email and text message. She even called her lawyer and updated her will without telling Robert. Then, last Tuesday night, Robert came over for dinner. He seemed nervous, distracted. He kept checking his phone. Melissa had texted him 3 times during the meal. After dinner, Robert offered to make tea while Margaret cleaned up. When she returned to the living room, she felt dizzy and exhausted. Robert suggested she lie down on the couch instead of going upstairs to bed. Margaret agreed, but something felt wrong. The tea tasted bitter. As she lay on the couch, pretending to fall asleep, she realized what was happening. Robert had put something in her tea, not enough to harm her seriously, probably just a strong sleep aid. He wanted her unconscious while he did whatever he was planning. Margaret kept her breathing slow and steady. She let her body go limp, and she waited. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, she heard Robert come downstairs. Through barely opened eyes, she watched him sit at her computer desk. He pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket. It was a list of her accounts. He had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. He knew which banks she used. He knew the approximate balances. He even had printouts of transfer forms. Margaret watched in silent horror as her son logged into her primary bank account. He didn't use the fake password she had written down. He had somehow gotten the real one. Maybe he had watched her type it. Maybe he had installed spyware on her computer. Either way, he was in, and he started transferring money immediately. First, he moved $20,000 to an account Margaret didn't recognize, then another $30,000, then $40,000. He worked quickly, efficiently, like someone who had practiced this. Margaret's phone, which was in her purse across the room, was buzzing with text alerts, but Robert didn't hear it. He was too focused on the computer screen. Margaret wanted to scream. She wanted to jump up and stop him, but she stayed still. She needed to see everything. She needed to know exactly what he was doing, how much he was taking, where it was going. This was evidence. This was proof, and she was going to need every bit of it. By 2:47 in the morning, Robert had transferred $127,000 from Margaret's accounts, everything except the $600 in her checking account for monthly bills. He had taken her entire life savings, 40 years of careful planning, of sacrificing vacations and new clothes, of saving every bonus and tax return. Gone. Robert shut down the computer, checked that Margaret was still sleeping, and quietly left the house. Margaret heard his car drive away. Only then did she allow herself to cry. Margaret didn't sleep for the rest of the night. She sat up on the couch, her hands shaking, staring at nothing. The betrayal cut deeper than the money. This was her son, the baby boy she had held in her arms 39 years ago. The child she had raised alone after her first husband left. The young man she had supported through college. How had he become this person? She remembered the sleepless nights when Robert was a baby, how she had walked him around the apartment at 3 in the morning when he had colic. She remembered his first day of school, how he had cried and clung to her leg. She remembered teaching him to ride a bike, holding onto the seat as he wobbled down the sidewalk. She remembered his high school graduation, how proud she had been. She remembered helping him move into his college dorm, how he had hugged her tight and promised to call every week. Where had that boy gone? When had he turned into someone who could drug his own mother and steal everything she had worked for? Margaret tried to pinpoint the exact moment when things changed, but there wasn't one. It had been gradual. After he married Melissa, the phone calls became less frequent. The visits became shorter. The conversations became more superficial. He stopped asking about her life and only talked about his own problems, money problems, work problems, relationship problems. And Margaret, desperate to maintain their connection, had thrown money at every problem, hoping it would bring him back to her. But it hadn't. It had only taught him that she was a resource to be exploited. She had enabled this, not the theft itself, but the mindset that made him think it was acceptable. By always bailing him out, by never letting him face consequences, by prioritizing his needs over her own boundaries, she had created a pattern. Or maybe Melissa had created the pattern, and Margaret had just provided the opportunity. At 5 in the morning, Margaret got up and made coffee. Her hands were steadier now. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold determination. She retrieved her phone and looked at the text alerts, transaction after transaction, her Chase account, her Wells Fargo savings, her emergency fund at the credit union, all emptied. Each alert felt like a physical blow. Transfer of $20,000 at 2:03 a.m., transfer of $30,000 at 2:11 a.m., transfer of $40,000 at 2:19 a.m. on, until there was nothing left except the $600 in her checking account designated for this month's utilities and groceries. 40 years of savings gone in less than an hour. She thought about what that money represented, not just dollars and cents, but years of her life. Every overtime shift she had taken at the library, every vacation she had postponed, every new coat she had decided she didn't really need, every restaurant meal she had skipped in favor of cooking at home, all of it stolen by her own child while she lay drugged and helpless on her own couch. She went to her computer and checked the security camera footage. Everything was there. Clear video of Robert at her desk, typing, transferring money. The timestamp showed exactly when each transfer was made. She watched the footage 3 times, each viewing more painful than the last. In the video, she could see Robert's face clearly. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't crying either. His expression was focused, determined, businesslike. She noticed details she had missed in real time. The way he kept checking his phone, probably looking at instructions. The way he had a small notebook open beside the computer, referring to it periodically. The way he paused after each transfer, waiting for the confirmation screen. This was methodical. This was practiced. Margaret downloaded the footage to her USB drive and made 3 backup copies. She saved one to her cloud storage, one to a second USB drive that she would give to her lawyer, and one to an SD card that she tucked into her jewelry box. Then Margaret did something Robert never expected. She logged into her bank accounts and took screenshots of every transaction. She noted the receiving account numbers. She wrote down the exact times. And she saw something interesting. The money hadn't gone to Robert's personal account. It had gone to 3 different business accounts, all with names she didn't recognize. Pacific Ventures, LLC, Northwest Holdings Group, Cascade Investment Partners. The names sounded professional, legitimate, like real companies. But Margaret had helped patrons research businesses countless times during her library career. She knew the warning signs of shell companies. Margaret had been a librarian. She knew how to research. She spent the next 2 hours searching for information about these companies. What she found made her blood run cold. All 3 companies were registered in Delaware, a state known for loose corporate regulations. All 3 had been created within the past 6 months, and all 3 listed the same address, an office building in downtown Portland. She looked up the address on Google Maps. It was a tall glass building in the financial district. She clicked on their website. They offered mail forwarding, phone answering services, and professional business addresses. In other words, it was a service designed to help people hide. Margaret dug deeper. She found the business registration documents on Delaware's public records website, and there they were, in black and white, Robert Chen and Melissa Chen, listed as managing members of all 3 LLCs. But there was more. The companies had been formed 7 months ago, not 6. That meant Robert and Melissa had been planning this for at least 7 months. She thought back to 7 months ago. That was March. Robert had started visiting more frequently. He had offered to help with her computer, and Melissa had asked to see photos of Margaret's house for a home design project. Margaret had given her a full tour. Now she realized Melissa had been casing the place. At 7:30 in the morning, Margaret's phone rang. It was Robert. "Mom, are you okay? I stopped by last night, but you were really tired. I let myself out." Margaret's voice was calm, controlled. "I'm fine, dear. Thank you for the tea." "No problem. Hey, I was thinking maybe I could come over this afternoon. There's something I need to talk to you about." "What about?" "Well, I've been looking at your finances, and I think you might be having some trouble managing everything. Maybe it would be better if I helped you more. Maybe I could have power of attorney just to make things easier." There it was, the next step in his plan. Now that he had the money, he wanted legal control too. That way, if anyone questioned the transfers, he could claim he had authority to make them. "That's very thoughtful, Robert. Why don't you come over around 3 o'clock? We can discuss it then." "Great. See you then, Mom. Love you. Love you too." Margaret hung up and immediately called her lawyer. The woman answered on the second ring. "Margaret, is everything all right?" "No, I need to see you immediately. It's an emergency. I can be at the office in 30 minutes. Margaret drove to the office, bringing her laptop, her USB drive with the security footage, her phone with the transaction alerts, and printed copies of the business registrations. Her lawyer was a sharp woman in her mid-50s who had handled David's estate and had recently updated Margaret's will. Margaret laid everything out on the conference table. "My son robbed me last night, $127,000, and I have proof of everything." The lawyer's eyes widened as she reviewed the evidence. The video footage was damning. The transaction records were clear. The business registrations connected Robert and Melissa directly to the shell companies. "Margaret, this is serious fraud. We need to contact the police and the FBI. This crosses state lines because he used shell companies in Delaware. We're talking about wire fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and organized financial crime." "I know, but I want to do this carefully. Robert is coming to my house at 3 o'clock today. He wants me to sign power of attorney documents. I think he's going to try to make this look legal retroactively." The lawyer thought for a moment. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we file a police report. Immediately. Second, we contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Third, we get an emergency freeze on those business accounts before Robert can move the money again. And fourth, we set a trap." "A trap?" "Robert thinks you're a confused old woman who doesn't understand what happened. Let's use that. When he comes over this afternoon, you'll be wired. The police will be listening. Let him try to convince you to sign those papers. Let him explain why you should give him power of attorney. Every word will be recorded." Margaret felt a surge of satisfaction. And then we arrest him in your living room in front of witnesses. And we make sure Melissa is charged too. They spent the next hour preparing." The lawyer called a detective at the Portland Police Department. The detective was an expert in elder fraud and financial crimes. She immediately understood the severity of the case. "Mrs. Chen, what your son did is unfortunately common, but the scale is unusual. Most family theft involves smaller amounts. $127,000, shell companies, and conspiracy. This is sophisticated. We need to move fast before he transfers the money offshore." The detective brought in an FBI agent who specialized in wire fraud. The agent reviewed the evidence and made immediate calls to the banks and to Delaware's corporate registration office. Within 2 hours, all 3 shell company accounts were frozen. Robert couldn't touch the money. Now we wait. Your son is going to realize the accounts are frozen. He's going to panic. And when he comes to your house this afternoon, he's going to try to manipulate you into believing you authorized these transfers. Don't let him gaslight you. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Margaret returned home. She was wearing a small microphone taped to her chest, hidden under her cardigan. The detective and the FBI agent were in an unmarked van down the street. Margaret's lawyer was with them, monitoring everything. Margaret made tea. Real tea this time, nothing added. She used her best china, the set her mother had given her as a wedding gift. She set out cookies on a plate, the homemade oatmeal raisin cookies that Robert had loved as a child. She wanted everything to look normal, comfortable, safe. As she arranged the teacups, her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of containing her rage. She kept thinking about the video footage, about watching her son steal from her while she lay drugged. This hadn't been a moment of weakness. This had been a calculated campaign. At 2:55, Robert's car pulled into the driveway. Margaret watched through the window as he sat in his car for a moment, checking his phone, taking a deep breath. He was wearing a blue button-down shirt and khaki pants. He was carrying a leather briefcase. Everything about his appearance was calculated to project success and trustworthiness. He was alone. Melissa hadn't come. Margaret had expected that. Melissa was too smart to put herself in the room when the trap might spring. Robert walked in with a briefcase and a folder of documents. He kissed Margaret's cheek. "Hey, Mom. How are you feeling?" "A little tired. I slept on the couch last night. I don't know why I was so exhausted." Margaret kept her voice slightly confused, playing the role he expected. "Maybe you're not getting enough rest. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. I've been really worried about you living alone. What if something happens? What if you fall or get confused about your medications? Margaret poured tea. I'm managing fine, dear. I know you think you are. But Mom, you're 68. Dad's been gone for 5 years. I think it's time we made some arrangements to protect you. What kind of arrangements? Robert pulled papers from his briefcase. I had a lawyer draw up power of attorney documents. It would let me help you manage your money, pay your bills, make sure everything is taken care of. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. Margaret looked at the documents. They were professionally prepared, with official stamps and notary sections. Robert had been planning this carefully. Why do you need power of attorney? I can manage my own finances. Mom, I hate to say this, but I checked your accounts this morning. There's almost nothing there. Did you make some big purchases? Did someone steal from you? I'm worried you might be getting confused. There it was. He was going to pretend the theft never happened. He was going to make her think she had spent the money herself. My accounts are empty? Margaret put a hand to her chest, playing the confused elderly woman perfectly. Yes. Your savings are gone. That's why I need you to let me help. Sign these papers and I'll make sure no one can take advantage of you again. Robert, I don't understand. Where did my money go? I don't know, Mom. Maybe you paid for something and forgot. Maybe someone hacked your account. But we need to fix this now. Sign the papers. He pushed the documents across the table with a pen. His voice was urgent, insistent. This was the moment. If Margaret signed, Robert would have legal cover for everything he'd done. I need to think about this. Robert's expression hardened. Mom, there's nothing to think about. I'm trying to protect you. If you don't sign these, you could lose everything. I already lost everything. You took it. The room went silent. Robert's face changed from concern to confusion to fear in the space of 3 seconds. What? Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. Last night, 2 out in the morning, you drugged my tea, waited for me to fall asleep, and transferred $127,000 from my accounts into 3 shell companies you and Melissa created: Pacific Ventures LLC, Northwest Holdings Group, Cascade Investment Partners. I watched you do it. Robert stood up, his face pale. You're confused. You must have had a bad dream. I have video footage. I have transaction records. I have copies of the business registrations with your name and Melissa's name. I have everything. Mom, listen to me. The front door opened. The detective walked in, followed by the FBI agent. 2 uniformed officers came in behind them. Robert Chen, you're under arrest for wire fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Robert's mouth fell open. This is insane. Mom, tell them this is a misunderstanding. The detective read him his Miranda rights while the agent took the power of attorney documents as evidence. Robert kept looking at Margaret, his eyes pleading, desperate. Mom, please, I'm your son. Margaret stood up, her voice steady and strong. My son would never drug me. My son would never steal from me. My son would never try to manipulate me into signing away my rights. I don't know who you are, but you're not my son anymore. As the officers handcuffed Robert, his phone rang. He couldn't answer it, but Margaret could see the caller ID. It was Melissa. The detective nodded to Margaret, who answered the call on speakerphone. Robert? Did she sign the papers? Melissa's voice was sharp, anxious. This is Margaret. There was a long pause. Margaret? Where's Robert? He's being arrested. And you're next. I don't know what you're talking about. The FBI is listening to this call, Melissa. They know about the shell companies. They know you're listed as an officer on all 3. They've frozen the accounts. You can't access the money. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Melissa's voice changed, becoming cold and bitter. You have no idea what you've done. Robert and I needed that money. We have debts. We have problems. You were just sitting on all that cash, doing nothing with it. That was my retirement savings, my life's work. You're old. You don't need it. You could live on Social Security. But us? We're young. We have expenses. That money should be ours anyway. You're going to die soon and we'll inherit it. We just moved up the timeline." The detective made a gesture and an officer left the room quickly. The agent was already on his phone, coordinating with Portland PD to send units to Robert and Melissa's house. "Melissa, are you saying you and Robert planned this together?" "Of course we planned it together. This was my idea. Robert was too soft. He actually felt guilty. Can you believe that? He wanted to just ask you for a loan. I had to convince him that you owe us this money. You're his mother. It's your job to take care of him. By drugging me and committing fraud, by doing what needed to be done. And now you've ruined everything. Do you know what Robert owes? $50,000 in gambling debts, $20,000 in credit card bills. We were going to lose our house. That money was going to save us. Then you should have asked for help. I might have given you a loan." Melissa laughed bitterly. "You would have lectured us about financial responsibility. You would have made us feel like failures. This way was cleaner. You would have woken up confused, we would have helped you recover, and eventually you would have accepted that the money was just gone. By the time you died, it wouldn't matter anymore." "Melissa, you do realize the FBI is recording this conversation?" The line went dead. Melissa had hung up. But it didn't matter. She had confessed to everything. Her words were recorded, time-stamped, and backed up on multiple devices. The agent got off his phone. "Units are at their house. Melissa Chen is in custody." Margaret sat down heavily. The adrenaline was wearing off and exhaustion was setting in. The detective sat beside her. "Mrs. Chen, you did incredibly well. Most victims of elder fraud never recover their money because they don't have evidence this strong. You've given us everything we need to prosecute both of them. What happens now? Now we process them. They'll be arraigned tomorrow morning. The district attorney will file formal charges. Given the amount of money involved and the sophistication of the crime, they're looking at serious prison time, 5 to 10 years. Probably more with the conspiracy charges. And my money? The accounts are frozen. It might take a few weeks to process everything, but you'll get it back, every penny. Plus, you can file a civil lawsuit for damages, emotional distress, and legal fees." Robert was taken out in handcuffs. As he passed Margaret, he stopped. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to go this far, but it did go this far. You made choices, Robert. Now you have to live with the consequences. Will you visit me in jail?" Margaret looked at her son, this stranger wearing her child's face. "I don't know. Ask me in 5 years." The news spread fast. By evening, Margaret's phone was ringing constantly. Robert's friends wanted to know what happened. Distant relatives called with questions. Melissa's parents showed up at Margaret's door demanding she drop the charges. "Your son ruined our daughter's life," Melissa's mother shouted from the porch. Margaret had called the detective, who sent an officer to stand by. "Your daughter ruined her own life." She confessed to planning the whole thing. Melissa would never do that. Robert must have forced her. "You're sending an innocent woman to prison." The FBI has recordings of Melissa confessing. She admitted it was her idea. She said Robert was too soft and she had to convince him. Those are her exact words. The woman's face crumpled. She was someone who had spoiled her only daughter and refused to see any flaws. Please. Melissa has a good job. She has a future. Don't destroy her over money. She tried to destroy me first. And it wasn't just about money. They drugged me. They created fake companies to hide theft. They tried to manipulate me into signing away my legal rights. This was calculated, planned, and malicious. Melissa's father stepped forward. He was quieter, more broken. "We can pay you back. We have savings. Just drop the charges." "How much do you have?" "About 30,000. They stole 127,000. Can you cover the rest?" The man's shoulders sagged. "No. Even if you could, I wouldn't drop the charges. This isn't about money anymore. It's about justice." The next morning, Margaret attended the arraignment. The courtroom was packed. Robert and Melissa were brought in wearing orange jumpsuits, their hands cuffed. They looked exhausted, frightened. Robert's eyes searched for Margaret. When he found her, he mouthed the word, "sorry," again. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the charges. "Mr. Chen, Mrs. Chen, you are charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and grand larceny. How do you plead?" Their public defender, a young man who looked overwhelmed, spoke for them. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor, the state requests that bail be set at $500,000 each. These defendants created shell companies across state lines, engaged in elaborate fraud, and pose a significant flight risk. The victim is the defendant's own mother, which demonstrates a pattern of exploiting family relationships. The defense attorney argued for lower bail. Your Honor, my clients have no prior criminal record. They have steady employment and ties to the community. They're not flight risks." The judge looked over her glasses at the defendants. Creating fake companies to hide stolen money shows sophisticated planning. Drugging an elderly woman shows callous disregard for her safety. Attempting to coerce her into signing power of attorney shows ongoing criminal intent. Bail is set at $500,000 each. Next case. Robert and Melissa couldn't make bail. They would stay in jail until trial. As they were let out, Melissa turned to Margaret with pure hatred in her eyes. "This is your fault. You could have just let us have the money." Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation expanded. The FBI agent discovered that Robert and Melissa had been planning this for over a year. They had opened the shell companies 10 months ago. They had taken out a second mortgage on their house to cover gambling debts but couldn't make the payments. They had maxed out 6 credit cards. They were drowning in debt and saw Margaret's savings as their only way out. But there was more. The agent found evidence that Robert and Melissa had tried this before, with Melissa's grandmother 2 years ago. They had convinced the elderly woman to invest $40,000 in a business opportunity that never existed. The grandmother, suffering from early dementia, never reported it. She died a year later, believing she had simply made a bad investment. This changed everything. The district attorney added additional charges: pattern of elder abuse, prior fraud, and exploitation of vulnerable adults. Now Robert and Melissa were looking at 15 to 20 years in prison. Margaret was in her garden when the detective came by with the news. "We found evidence of prior fraud. Melissa's grandmother, they did the same thing to her." Margaret felt sick. Does her family know? They do now. Melissa's parents are devastated. They had no idea. The grandmother never told anyone because she was embarrassed. That poor woman. There's something else. We've been monitoring Robert and Melissa's jail calls. They're allowed to talk to each other once a day for 15 minutes. Yesterday, Melissa told Robert to stay quiet, take the fall, and protect her. She said if he did, she'd wait for him and they'd still have a future together. You're recording their calls? All jail calls are recorded. It's legal and they're warned about it. But apparently, they forgot. Melissa has been coaching Robert on what to say, trying to create a story where he acted alone, and she knew nothing. What did Robert say? The detective smiled grimly. He told her to go to hell. Apparently being arrested was enough to open his eyes. He's ready to cooperate. He wants to testify against Melissa in exchange for a reduced sentence. The next day, Robert's public defender was replaced by a private attorney paid for by Robert's father. James Chen was Margaret's ex-husband, the man who had left her 35 years ago when Robert was 4. He had remarried, built a successful real estate business, and had minimal contact with Robert over the years. James came to Margaret's house unannounced. She almost didn't recognize him. He was 68, like her, but looked older. Gray hair, tired eyes, expensive suit. Margaret, James, I heard what happened. So you're here to defend your son? I'm here to apologize. I was a terrible father. I left you to raise him alone. I sent money, but never time. And now he's in jail for trying to steal from you. This is partially my fault. Margaret was surprised by his honesty. What do you want? I hired a lawyer for Robert, not to get him off. to help him cooperate with the prosecution. He's ready to tell the truth about everything, including Melissa's grandmother. In exchange, he hopes for a reduced sentence, maybe 5 years instead of 20. And Melissa? She gets the full sentence, 20 years. She was the mastermind. She has a history of this. She deserves prison. Margaret studied her ex-husband's face. Why now? Why do you suddenly care? Because I got a call from my doctor yesterday. I have cancer, pancreatic, stage 4. I have maybe 6 months. And I realized I don't want to die knowing my son is a criminal who hurt his own mother. I want to do one decent thing before I go. Margaret felt a wave of complicated emotions. Anger at James for abandoning them decades ago. Pity for his diagnosis. Sadness for what could have been. I'm sorry about your diagnosis. I'm sorry about everything else. Will you consider Robert's cooperation? He's genuinely remorseful. Melissa manipulated him, exploited his gambling addiction, and pushed him into this. James, I've seen the evidence. Robert made choices. He drugged me. He created those companies. Yes, Melissa pushed him, but he did it. He's not an innocent victim. I know, but he's still my son. And yours. Doesn't that count for something? Margaret thought about the boy Robert used to be. The child who brought her flowers from the neighbor's garden. The teenager who stayed up with her when she had the flu. The young man who cried at David's funeral. Where had that person gone? I'll think about it. But I'm not making any promises. 3 days later, Margaret received a call from the prosecutor. Mrs. Chen, we have a problem. A big one. What kind of problem? Robert's cooperation revealed something we didn't know. The shell companies weren't just used for your money. They were part of a larger operation. Melissa has been running a fraud ring for 3 years, targeting elderly people across Oregon and Washington. Your case was just the most recent. Margaret felt the room spin. How many victims? At least 12 that we've found so far. Total theft of over $2 million. Melissa has been the organizer. She recruits people, usually family members or caregivers, and coaches them on how to steal from elderly relatives. She takes a cut of everything stolen. Robert was recruited by his own wife? Yes. And he's not the only spouse involved. We've identified 8 other people Melissa recruited. They all use the same methods: gain access to accounts, create shell companies, transfer money, then gaslight the victims into thinking they spent it themselves or were hacked. Margaret sat down heavily. This was so much bigger than she thought. Melissa had a whole system. She found vulnerable targets through her job. She works as a pharmaceutical sales rep, visiting nursing homes and assisted living facilities. She'd identify residents with money but no close family. Then she'd recruit someone from inside the facility, usually a caregiver, and teach them how to steal. How did no one notice? Most victims were confused elderly people with memory issues. When their money disappeared, they couldn't clearly explain what happened, or they were embarrassed and didn't report it, or they died before anyone investigated. Melissa was smart. She never stole everything, just enough that it might look like normal spending. But she stole everything from me, because you were family. She thought you'd be easier to manipulate. She didn't know you were sharp enough to catch her. What does this mean for the case? It means Melissa is facing federal RICO charges, racketeering, organized crime. She's going to prison for life, not just 20 years. And Robert's testimony is crucial. He can connect Melissa to at least 6 of the other thefts. He has text messages, emails, recordings of her coaching him. What does Robert get in exchange? 3 years in minimum security prison, probation for 5 years after, mandatory restitution to all victims, and a permanent felony record. Margaret was silent. 3 years seemed light for what Robert did. But if his testimony put away someone who had stolen from dozens of elderly people, maybe it was worth it. Has Robert agreed to this? Yes. He's ready to testify. But there's one more thing. He wants to speak with you, face to face, before the trial. Margaret's first instinct was to refuse, but she had questions only Robert could answer. Fine, I'll see him. 2 days later, Margaret sat in a small visiting room at the county jail. Robert was brought in wearing his orange jumpsuit. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. When he saw Margaret, he started to cry. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Margaret's voice was cold. "Tell me why. Why did you do this to me?" Robert wiped his eyes. "Gambling. I was in debt to people who threatened to hurt me if I didn't pay. Melissa said she knew how to get money. She showed me how easy it was. She had done it before with her grandmother and never got caught. She convinced me you wouldn't even miss the money. I would have helped you if you'd asked." "I know, but I was ashamed. And Melissa said asking would just make you lecture me about responsibility. She made it seem like taking the money was actually helping you, like we were preventing you from being scammed by strangers. That's manipulation, Robert. I know that now. Being in here, away from her, I see how twisted her logic was. She's not who I thought she was. Did you love her?" Robert was quiet for a long time. "I thought I did. Now I think she just used me from the beginning." The trial lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was packed every day with victims, families, reporters, and curious citizens. News cameras lined the hallway outside, reporters jostling for position. The case had become a media sensation. Elder fraud ring exposed by brave widow who pretended to sleep. The headlines wrote themselves. Melissa sat at the defense table looking calm and composed, dressed in conservative clothes, her hair pulled back, playing the role of innocent wife caught in circumstances beyond her control. She wore minimal makeup, a modest navy dress, and small pearl earrings. Her lawyer had clearly coached her on how to appear sympathetic, vulnerable, like a woman who had been led astray rather than the criminal mastermind she actually was. Margaret attended every day of the trial. She wanted Melissa to see her, to know that her primary victim was watching, remembering, waiting for justice. She sat in the front row, directly in Melissa's line of sight. Sometimes their eyes would meet, and Margaret would hold her gaze until Melissa looked away. It was a silent battle of wills, and Margaret was winning. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They presented evidence of 12 separate fraud cases spanning 3 years. Each victim told their story. An 84-year-old man who lost his house because his caregiver, recruited by Melissa, stole his savings. He testified in a wheelchair, his voice shaking as he described how he now lived in a studio apartment, having lost the home he and his wife had raised their children in. A 90-year-old woman whose grandson took $200,000. She wept on the stand, saying she could no longer afford the medication that kept her alive. A 76-year-old widower whose daughter emptied his accounts. He testified that he had contemplated suicide after discovering the theft, feeling that his own child had left him with nothing to live for. Story after story of betrayal, theft, and broken families. The prosecutor displayed charts showing the web of connections between Melissa and all the perpetrators, text messages where she coached them on exactly what to say, email threads discussing the best ways to manipulate elderly relatives, bank records showing her taking a percentage of every theft. It was damning, comprehensive, impossible to refute. Robert testified on day 8. He took the stand wearing a suit provided by his father, looking young and frightened. The prosecutor led him through his testimony carefully. "Mr. Chen, how did you meet the defendant?" "At a hospital fundraiser 6 years ago. She was working there as a pharmaceutical rep. I was there with my company. We started dating 3 months later. When did she first suggest stealing from your mother?" "About 2 years after we got married. I had gambling debts. I told Melissa I was scared. She said she knew how to get money without anyone noticing. She had done it before with her own grandmother. What did she tell you to do?" "She gave me a step-by-step plan. Set up online banking for my mom, get her passwords, create shell companies to hide the transfers, make her trust me so she wouldn't suspect. And if she did notice, convince her she was confused or had been hacked by strangers." Did you want to do this? Robert's voice broke. No, I thought about backing out 100 times, but Melissa said the people I owed money to would hurt me. She made it seem like I had no choice. Did the defendant teach others how to commit similar thefts? Yes. She had a whole network. She called them her financial freedom team. She recruited people through support groups for gambling addiction and debt. She'd offer to help them get money by borrowing from elderly relatives who wouldn't miss it. Did you attend these recruitment meetings? Twice. I saw her coaching at least 8 other people on exactly what to do. She had PowerPoint presentations. She had sample documents. She even had lawyers who would create the shell companies for a fee. Is the defendant in this courtroom? Yes, that's her at the defense table. Melissa stared at Robert with such intensity that the judge had to tell her to face forward. Robert couldn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the prosecutor. Melissa's defense attorney tried to break Robert's testimony. Mr. Chen, isn't it true that you're testifying against Mrs. Chen in exchange for a reduced sentence? Yes. So you have an incentive to lie, to say whatever the prosecution wants you to say? I'm not lying. Everything I said is true. You stole from your own mother. You drugged her. You created fake companies. And now you're trying to blame everything on my client. I'm not blaming everything on her. I take responsibility for what I did. But Melissa planned it. She recruited me. She coached me. She took a percentage of what I stole. Do you have proof of that? Yes. Text messages, emails, and bank records showing transfers from the shell companies to Melissa's personal accounts. The defense attorney looked uncomfortable. The prosecution had those records. They were exhibits in the case. He changed tactics. Mr. Chen, you claim Mrs. Chen ran a fraud ring. But isn't it possible you're just trying to make yourself look less guilty by inventing a conspiracy? The FBI found 12 victims. That's not invented. But you only personally know about your own mother's case. The other cases could be unrelated. I was at 2 of Melissa's recruitment meetings. I heard her coaching other people. I saw the same documents, the same shell company templates, the same methods. It's not a coincidence. The attorney pressed harder. You're facing 20 years in prison. You'd say anything to get that reduced to 3 years, wouldn't you? Robert finally looked at the defense attorney directly. I'm saying the truth because I can't live with lying anymore. I lied to my mother. I lied to myself about who Melissa really was. I'm done lying. Melissa is a predator who targets elderly people. She should be in prison for the rest of her life. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge banged her gavel. Melissa whispered furiously to her attorney. After Robert, the prosecution called other co-conspirators who had also agreed to testify. Each one told similar stories. Melissa approached them when they were desperate. She offered easy money. She provided detailed plans. She took a cut of everything stolen. She threatened them if they tried to back out. One witness, a former caregiver, testified that Melissa had threatened her family when she wanted to stop. She said if I didn't keep stealing, she'd report me for the thefts I'd already committed. She said I'd go to prison. I was trapped. What made you finally come forward? Mrs. Chen, Margaret. When I heard she caught her son and reported him, I realized I could do the same thing. I went to the police and told them everything. Margaret listened to testimony after testimony. Each story broke her heart. Melissa had destroyed families, stolen futures, and shattered trust between parents and children, grandparents and grandchildren, all for money. On day 15, Melissa took the stand in her own defense. It was a risky move, but her attorney had no choice. The evidence was too strong. Melissa needed to offer an alternative explanation. Melissa's voice was soft, vulnerable. I never intended to hurt anyone. I was trying to help people who were struggling financially. I thought we were just moving money around within families, from people who didn't need it to people who did. The prosecutor stood up for cross-examination. Mrs. Chen, you testified that you were helping people. How is stealing helping? I didn't see it as stealing. I saw it as redistribution. These elderly people had more money than they needed. They were just sitting on it. Did you ask the elderly people if they wanted their money redistributed? No, but did you inform them that their relatives were taking their money? They wouldn't have understood. So you decided for them that they didn't need their own money. I was helping families. The prosecutor's voice grew sharper. You took a cut of every theft. How much money did you personally make from this help you provided? Melissa hesitated. I don't know exactly. The FBI tracked your accounts. You made $467,000 over 3 years. Does that sound about right? I needed that money for expenses. What expenses? Your house, your car, your vacations? Yes. So you lived a comfortable life on money stolen from elderly people? It wasn't stealing. Melissa's calm facade cracked. Those people were going to die anyway. The money would have gone to their kids eventually. We just accelerated the timeline. The courtroom gasped. Margaret felt tears on her face. This woman had no remorse. She genuinely believed she had done nothing wrong. The prosecutor pressed on. Mrs. Chen, did you know that 3 of your victims died within months of their theft and that financial stress contributed to their decline? Melissa's face went pale. I didn't know that. Didn't know or didn't care? I never wanted anyone to die. But they did. Your actions killed them. The defense attorney objected. That's inflammatory and not proven. The judge sustained the objection, but the damage was done. The prosecutor rephrased. Mrs. Chen, when you stole from these elderly people, did you consider that the stress might affect their health? I didn't think about it. Exactly. You didn't think about the victims at all. You only thought about money. Melissa had no answer. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood up and read the verdict. Count 1, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, guilty. Count 2, racketeering, guilty. Count 3, elder abuse, guilty. Count 4. It took 5 minutes to read all 37 guilty verdicts. Melissa stood frozen, her face expressionless. Her parents in the gallery were crying. Her attorney slumped in his chair. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks later. Melissa remained in custody. On sentencing day, the courtroom was even more packed. 12 victims or their families gave impact statements. Margaret went last. Your Honor, I am 68 years old. I worked for 35 years to save $127,000. That money represented security, dignity, and the life my husband and I built together. Melissa Chen tried to take all of that from me. But she took something more valuable than money. She took my trust in my own son. She destroyed my family. That damage is permanent and can never be repaired with any amount of restitution. Margaret paused, looking directly at Melissa. I thought about what I wanted to say today. I thought about anger and revenge. But what I feel now is sadness. Sadness for all the victims. Sadness for the families torn apart. And sadness for Melissa, who is so broken inside that she sees elderly people as targets instead of human beings. I hope prison gives her time to understand the pain she's caused. The judge nodded solemnly. Mrs. Chen, I have reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the impact statements. Your crimes were calculated, extensive, and devastating. You showed no remorse. You exploited vulnerable elderly people and recruited others to do the same. You are a danger to society. She paused, looking at Melissa. On the 37 counts, I sentence you to life in federal prison without possibility of parole for 25 years. You will also pay restitution to all victims totaling $2,300,000. Melissa showed emotion for the first time. She collapsed in her chair, sobbing. The bailiffs had to help her stand as they led her away. Robert's sentencing came 2 days later. The courtroom was smaller, quieter. James sat in the front row, looking frail. He had weeks, maybe days, left. The judge reviewed Robert's cooperation, his testimony, and his remorse. Mr. Chen, you committed serious crimes. You betrayed your mother's trust. However, your testimony was crucial in stopping a larger criminal operation. For that reason, I am sentencing you to 3 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will also pay restitution of $127,000 to your mother, plus $50,000 in damages." Robert stood up. "Your Honor, may I speak?" "Briefly." Robert turned to Margaret. "Mom, I know saying sorry isn't enough. I know I destroyed something that can't be fixed, but I want you to know that every day in prison, I'll think about what I did. And when I get out, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the person I should have been. The son you deserved." Margaret said nothing. She simply nodded once and left the courtroom. 6 weeks later, James died. His will left everything to Robert, but included a provision that the money must go directly to Margaret as restitution. It was $180,000, more than enough to cover what Robert owed. Margaret donated $50,000 to the FBI's Elder Fraud Victim Assistance Fund. The rest she kept, adding it to her recovered savings. 3 months after the trial, Margaret received a letter from Robert in prison. She almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won. The letter explained how prison was giving him time to think about everything he did wrong, not just stealing, but all the choices that led him there. The gambling, the lying, choosing Melissa over his mother. He wrote about how he finally understood Melissa had manipulated him, finding his weaknesses and exploiting them. But that didn't excuse what he did. He knew drugging his mother was wrong. He knew stealing was wrong. He did it anyway. James had visited him before he died and told him he was proud that Robert finally did the right thing by testifying. He said it was the first honest thing Robert had done in years. That hurt to hear, but it was true. Robert wrote that he had 33 months left in prison. When he got out, he'd be 42, middle-aged. He'd have a felony record. He'd have no career prospects. But he'd have something he didn't have before: honesty. He was learning to look at himself clearly, without excuses or justifications. He wrote about the other inmates, many of whom had also committed crimes against their own families. He wrote about the shame they all carried, the way they avoided talking about what they had done. He wrote about therapy sessions where he was slowly beginning to understand the depth of his betrayal. He wrote about nightmares where he saw Margaret's face when she realized what he had done. He wrote about wishing he could turn back time, make different choices, be a different person. But time only moved forward. The past couldn't be changed. All he could do was try to be better in the future. He didn't know if Margaret would ever forgive him. He didn't know if he even deserved forgiveness. But he wanted her to know that he was grateful she stopped him. If she hadn't, he would have kept going down that path. He would have become someone completely lost beyond redemption. He didn't know if Margaret would ever forgive him. He didn't know if he even deserved forgiveness. But he wanted her to know that he was grateful she stopped him. If she hadn't, he would have kept going. He would have become someone completely lost. The son she raised was still in there somewhere. He was trying to find him. Margaret folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. She wasn't ready to respond, but she kept it. 1 year later, Margaret received a call from the caregiver who had testified against Melissa. "Mrs. Chen, I wanted to thank you. Because you spoke up, I found the courage to do the same. I've been clean for a year. I got my caregiver license back. I'm working again, but this time doing it right. You saved my life." Margaret realized that her decision to report Robert had a ripple effect. By stopping Melissa, she had saved future victims. By testifying openly, she had given other co-conspirators the courage to come forward. Justice had been served, but more than that, lives had been changed. She started volunteering at the senior center, teaching classes on financial fraud prevention. She shared her story honestly, including the part where her own son betrayed her. Other seniors came to her with their own stories of theft and manipulation. Margaret helped them report the crimes, find lawyers, and recover their dignity. 2 years after the trial, Margaret visited Robert in prison for the first time. They sat across from each other in the visiting room, an awkward silence between them. "Thank you for coming. I'm not ready to forgive you, but I wanted to see if you're really changing or if prison is just making you a better liar." Robert nodded. "That's fair. I don't know how to prove I've changed except by living differently when I get out. Will you give me a chance to show you? Maybe. Ask me again in a year." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a start. Life teaches us that trust is precious and fragile. When someone betrays that trust, especially family, the pain cuts deep. But betrayal also reveals our own strength. We learn who we really are in moments of crisis. We learn that standing up for ourselves, even against those we love, is not cruel. It's necessary. Sometimes the people who hurt us need consequences to finally understand the harm they've caused. And sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable destructive behavior. Justice and love can coexist, but justice must come first. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.